This is when adrenaline soars, pressure is heightened, and expectations are raised.
Now, Rex, our number 4 story, and we've just brought him up while talking about Scotty Scheffler, is Cam Smith, a dude who can absolutely put the lights out of it. So Cam Smith's breakthrough and breakout season in 2022 is certainly filled with controversy. It was filled with great golf. Don't get me wrong. 3 wins on the PGA Tour, 1 on LIV, 1 at the end of the year at the Australian PGA. But of course, the most high-profile defector to LIV Golf made that decision at the end of the PGA Tour season. Cam Smith, what was his season like in one word for you?
Unbelievably good. Again,
That's 2. That's 2. All the rules.
You're right. If I had to use one word, which is you're going to challenge me as a journalist on that one, it's surreal. I would go with, simply because when you look at what he did on the golf course, again, we can make an argument that he was the best player this year in golf. Like, take the PGA Tour element out of it, just look at global golf. You can make a really good argument. We're going to have that conversation here in a moment, is my guess. But if you look at what he dealt with on and off the golf course, we've done a really good job over the last few months of pointing out how well Rory McIlroy has handled sort of that mantle that he has assumed on his own to be the de facto spokesperson for the PGA Tour when it comes to all things LIV Golf. Now, Cameron Smith is not, he doesn't want any of that shade. He hasn't taken on being the spokesperson for the other side, but he has had to deal with it. I mean, I remember at Eastlake when the news broke that he was going to go to LIV Golf. The rumors had been swirling for weeks, if not months, and then finally the news broke, and yet he still played pretty good, and he still sort of remained above it all. And in retrospect, I mean, you and I ask questions for a living, and we have an expectation that players are going to be honest with us. And I think sometimes, and this is a perfect
You were very
example
frosty. You were very frosty when Cam Smith didn't want to be forthright.
I was. And in retrospect, I think I've sort of come around to a different conclusion that what was he supposed to say? Like, he's playing in the Tour Championship.
Welcome back. Welcome back to my side. That's what I was saying the entire time. What did you possibly think that Cam Smith was going to say?
Like, and I guess he could have been a little less strident about it. I guess he could have, straddled the line a little bit, like we've seen other players do when they've been asked about this. Players who have gone to LIV Golf where they haven't pledged their allegiance to the PGA Tour and then turned around the next day. Brooks Koepka is probably the best example of this, where he sort of berates the press at the U.S. Open about, I can't believe you're doing this at the U.S. Open. I can't believe you're asking me these questions, and I'm here to win a championship, and this means the world to me. And then 2 days later, he signs with LIV Golf. That I don't want to see. But in Cam's case, I think you're right. I think there was not another choice for him. It's not as though he could stand up on Wednesday at the Tour Championship when he was playing for the FedEx Cup prize and be like, yep, this is it for me. See you boys later. I'm going to take the money and go to LIV Golf. That just doesn't land very well. So I will give him the benefit of the doubt on this one. And I think we all, like you wrote, I would call it the definitive piece about him at the Players Championship. I believe it was a, what's the word you use? Cojones?
Yes.
Was that it?
Yep.
I did it right too. Did you catch the flair I put on that?
Nailed it.
I nailed that one.
That's what happens when you're in the Bahamas. You have everything just nailed.
I would look
very cultural.
I would look back to how clutch he was at TPC Sawgrass and how well he played at St. Andrews against Rory, mind you, against Rory McIlroy, who was playing very, very good golf. It's not as though he was beating guys who weren't at the top of their game. Man, it's impossible not to look at his season, take everything else out of it. Take all of the noise, take LIV Golf, take whatever he might have said and not said out of it, and just look at his golf. It's hard not to vote him as the best player and best male player in golf this year.
5 wins. I mean, PGA Tour, LIV Golf, the Australian PGA at the end of the year. No elite player had more wins worldwide than Cam Smith did in 2022. What I think impressed me most, we'll touch on his golf here first, Rex, was how his 3 wins on the PGA Tour were all different. Like, he shot 34 under par and just that stirring performance at Kapalua, the Century Tournament of Champions, denying John Rahm. Like John was incredulous after, like what do we what can I possibly do to beat this guy? And he still played better golf than me. You mentioned the Players Championship, that clutch 66. It wasn't just the birdies that he made, but I think back to the 3rd shot he hit into 16, 17. He probably got away with a little bit of a push there, finishing right of the pin on the island green, and then having to get up and down after kind of a cataclysmic mistake that he made punching out from the trees on the 72nd hole. It was just so clutch. The cojones, as you mentioned, were very large and in
Wait,
charge.
try it again. I don't think you got it. Try it again. One more time.
Cojones.
Lean into it.
We're just going to skip over it. And then St. Andrews, the bogey-free 64, coming home in 30. He mentioned he was so nervous, Rex, that he couldn't even take a sip of water from the water bottle, but it certainly didn't look like it, the way that he played that back nine, navigating the road hole bunker with that deft touch around the greens. And then, you also throw in the win on LIV to kind of validate his decision there. And then at the end of the year, and what was a hugely important victory to him, at least personally, winning in his home country of Australia. I think it's actually easy to forget that Cam Smith was in the final group with Scottie Scheffler at the Masters, and he faded with that final round 73 at that time, at least. So he had the win at Kapalua. He'd had a nice season the season before, but I think the jury was still a little bit out. At that point,
ball striking, driving was always a question. Yeah,
and that's kind of where I want to go with this, because how big of a window for greatness can a guy have when he's the rare elite player who's actually losing strokes to the field with his driver? Like, his driver is a liability. When you think about the best players in the world, whether it's Rory, Scotty, John Rahm, Xander Schauffele, Justin Thomas, I mean, those guys wield their drivers as weapons. Cam Smith is standing over the golf ball when he's on the tee, not exactly sure where it's going to go. He's not particularly long, and he's not particularly accurate. Now, I will give him credit. He made great strides with his iron play this year. He was, top 5 on tour in strokes gained approach. When you have such a sublime short game and putter, it's hard to rely on that for a long time and think that's going to carry you to a long, fruitful career. I think back to Ricky Fowler, Jason Day, even Jordan Spieth to an extent. He was an elite iron player for, a 3 or 4 year span there, but everyone always looked at his short game and his putting. Those guys, they tend to flame out a little bit quicker when you just talked about Scottie Scheffler, right? Like, I'd much rather have a hitter of the golf ball, an elite hitter, as opposed to elite putter. Where do you kind of stand on Cam Smith's window of opportunity here?
Well, I remember we were probably having this conversation about this time last year. I mean, I remember being at Augusta probably Saturday night, and you and I just making a joke out of the idea that if you go back to last year's playoff, he got in that in New Jersey, he got into the playoff against Tony Finau, and he hit a foul ball that probably is still at the bottom of the Hudson River right about now. I mean, it was so bad that it was impossible to ignore. And look, you can't be judged by your worst moment in golf. I'm not going to sit here and say that defined him, but you're right. Statistically, he does not stack up to the other world-class putters. And yet, if you look at where he won, like, all right, take Kapalua out of the mix. I mean, it's hard to miss a fairway at Kapalua. But certainly the Players' Championship, you got to be able to hit the golf ball. There's not a lot of room out there. You and I can both attest to that.
Trust me, it gets narrow very quick when you're offline.
I mean, you stand on some of those tees and all you see is trouble. And so the fact he was able to do it there, the fact he was able to do it at St. Andrews, and look, we didn't get the wins that probably St. Andrews needs to.
Which I think was probably his saving grace. I mean, he had 5 to 10 mile an hour winds there. If it was howling, 15, 20, 25 miles an hour, I would have loved to see how his semi-erratic driving would have held up in those conditions. But we didn't get it, and he took advantage.
Well, and it was an interesting capsule in time that it was he and Rory. I mean, because Rory is, by any definition, we're going to call him the best driver of his generation. I guess you could put DJ in there and talk about it. But when Rory's driver is on, it is the best weapon in the game compared to this guy who does a lot of things really, really well, specifically putting really, really well, but doesn't drive it nearly as well. I would say he's middle of the pack when it comes to the PGA Tour. And you put him on a golf course where it should have mattered, even without the wind at St. Andrews. When you win there, you put people in a different category. We look at Zach Johnson differently because he has a Masters title at Augusta National and his Open came at St. Andrews. Certainly Jack Nicklaus has talked about this before. If you have those two to sort of bookmark whatever is in the middle of your career, that you've had a very, very special career. It's impossible to ignore. I we've had this fun before when we've sort of gone down the list of the players who've gone to LIV Golf, and we sort of check them off, and you'll miss them, you'll not miss them, you'll miss them, you'll not miss them. By and large, I think most of the players we said we would not miss. I would argue
Band of misfits. Band of
I would
misfits
argue
is how
that
we termed it.
Cam Smith was their best signing for a number of reasons. He's the highest ranked player that they were able to land, which is significant in and of itself. He's the champion golfer of the year, which again is very, very significant. And he brings you an entire region. I think the only player in the big picture, in the big scheme of things, of whatever it is they're trying to create, Hideki would be the only comparable person if they were able to land him at this point in time. I mean, I'm taking Tiger and Rory out of the mix. But if you look at what Cam brought to the table, I think he was by far the most significant signing of anybody they got.
Yeah, and I'm curious how you feel. What does it say about Cam Smith that at this juncture in his career he did make the leap to LIV? You would think that this was, he's just kind of on the precipice of what he could become. He's late 20s, like prime of his athletic career. He's never been in better shape. He's never struck the ball better than he has in his life. He's absolutely on fire on the greens. He now has this new stature, this new respect from all of his peers now who, seeing the performances he had in 2022 kind of validated all the potential that we saw in him. What does it say about Cam Smith that he was willing to jeopardize what appeared to be a very potentially fruitful PGA Tour career to go to LIV Golf at this juncture? What does it say about him?
I don't want to scrape the barrel too much because here's the tease. We're going to spend a lot of time in another one of these top 5 stories talking about LIV Golf. Don't be shocked by that. I have found it fascinating, however, that when you look at the players who have gone and the players who have not gone, there is a socioeconomic element to this. And I don't like it. It is so boring to even bring it up and to put it in that context. Cam Smith did not grow up a privileged player. He did not grow up in a privileged lifestyle. I'm sure that his parents were able to take care of him, and I wouldn't say he was poor. But I have found, and probably Harold Varner is the best example of this, right? Like he has made it perfectly clear. I was at Doral a few weeks ago, and he explained to me, he held up his phone and showed me a big construction site in the middle of the woods. And he goes, you know what that is? That's the house that LIV built. And for him, it's significant because he did not grow up with sort of that disposable wealth, that generational wealth, which all of these players will offer to varying degrees. And certainly with Cam Smith, if the reports are true, and again, we just made an argument that he was the most significant signing, it was generational wealth. It was going to mean the world, just not Cam, but to his family and probably his kids and probably his kids' kids for him to make this leap. You also pointed out before this was even on the radar. When you go back to your story at the Players' Championship, how much he missed going home, how much he missed not being able to go home to Australia because he was now in this cycle of being a PGA Tour player, of being a PGA Tour star. And it's hard. It's hard for them to take this time off, this time of year, and go back home and play in the Aussie PGA, in the Aussie Open. He wants to fish. He wants to be around his family. I have found that the connective tissue for the vast majority of the LIV players is, one, they don't talk about legacy. They don't talk about 10, 15, 20-year careers. They talk about, I'm doing this for the next 5, maybe 7 years, and then I'm out. I'm done. And they also talk about generational wealth. And when you look at Cam Smith, both of those things were very, very appealing, and it's easy to understand why.
I think the only surprise with Cam Smith, I remember back to the 2021 Tour Championship, and he was in the mix for the FedEx Cup title. I think at that time it was, $15 million, first place. And he was asked in his pre-tournament press conference, like, what could you do with $15 million? And he was just like, I got no idea. He was absolutely baffled. He's like, I'll get basically everything I need. Money's not important to me. Maybe I would just buy a nicer boat. Like, I just like to fish. I'm a pretty simple guy. And so I guess when the Saudis throw as much money as they did, reportedly anywhere from $100 to $125 million at the reigning Open and Players Championship, I guess your mind is able to come up with things that you could potentially buy and, setting yourself and your family up. So there's certainly layers to the decision. I don't fault anyone. They're all making personal decisions. Obviously, the opportunity to spend 3 or 4 months at home in Australia was very appealing to him. But I do think it's a trend that potentially is worth bearing out. When you have a player like Cam Smith who wins a major championship, he's now, exempt into the Open until he's 60. He's going to be exempt into the other majors either for the next 5 or 10 years, depending on that major championship. Is that a trend? is these first-time major champions, once they win a major, because right now major participation, as we're recording this in early December, is still a bit uncertain for how those LIV players are going to be welcomed, if at all, into those major championships and their various criteria. Do those players then make the jump to LIV? Do they not care about legacy and the tradition and trying to win tournaments like Bay Hill and Memorial and the Players and Riviera and tournaments like that? And do they just say, I'm going to cash out because, look, I can still play 14 times on LIV and I can still get in the major championship because I'm exempt from that by virtue of that win? That's something that I'm very interested to see in 2023. Do the rumors keep following the potential for a first-time major champion? I think Cam Smith could potentially be a trailblazer in that respect. What are your thoughts on that?
This is largely an audio medium, and we've enjoyed the audio medium because that allows us to do the hijinks and to bring the fun in games, but we're trying to turn it into a video medium, and I'm enjoying this. So I'm going to go ahead and lean into camera 2 here because I want to make a very, very clear point. Everybody's got a number, even Rory, and I know Rory has drawn a line. Even Tiger, I know Tiger has drawn a line. Everybody's got a number. So the short answer to your question is yes. If whoever player A is, young player A, who is just a singular player, let's put a name to it. Tom Kim is probably the best example of that right now, right? We can both agree that Tom Kim brings a very rare and enjoyable combination of really, really good golfer, really, really fun to be around, really, really interesting story. Let's say he turns around next year and wins the Masters. And suddenly LIV Golf is going to have a huge interest in him, not just for those 3 reasons, but also as an international player. It fits their profile well. Tom Kim's got a number. And I know he would probably sit here today at Albany at the Hero World Challenge and tell you, nope, I'm in it for legacy. I'm in it for all the things that Tiger and Rory talk about. He's still got a number. Because if they just keep adding zeros, man, I don't care who you are. You're not going to ignore it. And we can have the moral conversation. And I would love it if Brandel Chambly was on camera 3 right now because he would have a vastly different take than me.
2-shot.
Man,
this is a 2-shot. No room for 3.
No room for 3, just a 2-shot. Well, maybe we could just do the voiceover because I would love to hear what he has to say. I grew up poor, man. I got a number, and my number's not very high. But even if you're Tom Kim, he probably, his number's not as high as some people probably think it is. Everybody's got a number, man. I'm just not going to fall back on that. Good for Rory, good for Tiger for sticking with what they believe in, but everybody has a number.
Tom Kim, Cameron Young, Xander Schauffele, Patrick Cantlay, all those guys certainly could break the major mold in 2023, and I'd be very interested to hear what happens. So speaking of numbers, Cameron Smith is number 4 on our list of golfchannel.com stories of the year.